Hello and welcome to Community Case Studies. This is a show where we take a look at how belonging is really built. I'm your host. My name is Seth Resler of Community Marketing Revolution. And in this episode, we're doing something a little bit different. Normally, I bring guests on who have an established community and we talk about how they built that community. But in this case, I'm actually bringing on an established community builder who is in a situation where they have built communities in the past and now they are tasked with building a brand new community. And we're going to find out what she's thinking as she does that. What are the first steps? Where do you start? How do you figure out what's already in place? And where do you go from there? My guest is a longtime leader in the podcasting space and a champion for independent creators. After nearly 2 decades in the industry, she's now focused on helping creators build sustainable, values-driven work through her mentorship programs and her media platform, Multimodally. She's the creator of the E-League and Creative Sovereignty Sessions, where she works with established creators navigating growth, burnout, reinvention, and long-term vision. She also works alongside the team at Captivate as creator success and community manager, supporting independent podcasters inside their ecosystem. I want to welcome my friend, Elsie Escobar. Hi, Elsie. How are you?
Hi, I'm well. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. That's so fun.
Oh, I'm so thrilled that you're on. You and I have been friends for a long time. We've had an opportunity to work on a number of projects over the years, and you have recently landed at Captivate. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's absolutely
Thank you.
fantastic. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what you're doing there. But before we do, let's dive in a little bit into your background, because you've been a podcaster for a long time. I mean, you're one of the OG names in podcasting. I mean, if people have been around podcasting for a while, they know you. They may have met you because you're at all the events. But not only have you been involved in podcasting for a long time, you've really been a community builder in various fashions over the years. Talk to me a little bit about that and where those two things have intersected. Talk to me about how you've been building community and the different things that you've been doing.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how I ended up here from a lot of different ways. And now when I'm looking back, when you asked me this question, I was like, oh my gosh. And I have to go back all the way to when I was teaching yoga in Los Angeles for about 10 years or so. And, when I started to teach the yoga, people would end up coming to my classes all the time. Like I remember very specifically, I had a level 1 yoga class Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 2:30 p.m., which is a really weird time slot. And usually it's not necessarily a coveted time slot for yoga people because you get paid a very sort of a small, $30 or $50 if you're lucky, at least at that time in the, early aughts, where you show up and teach a class. And then though, the way that you do make money with classes is when the people actually start to show up. So you start to get money over that if there's X amount of students that show up to the class. The 2:30 classes in the middle of a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday are not usually well-attended classes. But for whatever reason, folks started to come to my Monday, Wednesday, Friday, yoga classes at 2:30. They were level 1 classes and people really, really loved them. And I started to build an audience there. At that same time, I got into podcasting. I got obsessed with podcasting. I was teaching many, many classes around town. And I started to record my yoga classes because that's what you do when you go into podcasting. You just want to record all the things. So I would wear a little recorder, and I decided, based on the feedback that I got from the people that showed up all the time, that they said, I want to take you with me, is what they said to me. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I thought, why not record myself and you can take me with you? And I started this podcast called Elsie's Yoga Class. And so folks used to then that podcast, because I was I think I was the first audio yoga teacher who had a podcast, and woman. And so people started to understand my voice. I started to get recognized. This is in 2006, where I would go into different places. If I would go to a yoga workshop, or I was traveling to a different state and I was walking around and people would hear me, they literally would say, they would look at me weird. And I actually was here, one of the last times that this happened, I had just moved to Asheville. And I was walking downtown Asheville and I was talking to whoever I was talking with. And I had these people look me straight in the eye and go, like, that look, like as if they're recognizing you, and they passed me by and then they ran back and they go, "Are you Elsie from Elsie's yoga class?" And I was like, "Yes." That is so weird. It happened to me in 3 separate states. And so anyway, all that to say, I started to build audience. I started to build community, because people would come and meet each other and they started to become friends, showing up at my classes. And then it started to expand even more because of the online conversations that were happening with me. I had people who would drive to come to my yoga classes who had only practiced with me virtually. And I was like blown away by that. I would have continued on doing that, but then I had life circumstances that sort of took me outside of the yoga world, fully into the podcasting world. And I started working at Libsyn. And when I started working at Libsyn, at that time, I was really fueled by I think the inspiration that I experienced through the yoga community, and the fire that I had from my people, and that I saw that same sort of vibe from the podcasting community at that time too. So I was very involved in showing up in spaces and joining and sending audio feedback to podcasts, and emailing shows, and responding to other podcasters' calls to action about, do this for me, you review the show, send me voice feedback. Like, I was the one that was like, yes, I will do all the things for you because I love you. And so I became very enthused. And in that enthusiasm, I started to do a lot of posting for Libsyn, and naturally started to bring a lot of sort of attention to the company based on my enthusiasm for building community.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I remember those early days too. I mean, this is back going on 20 years ago, and you were just excited when there was somebody else who knew what a podcast was. I remember the first time I saw you, it was speaking at Podcast Movement. I think you were leading a session in, I want to say, Fort Worth, Texas. A long, I think it was the second podcast, like it was a long time ago when I first encountered you. And the space has changed so much over that time. But I want to ask you about something you said there, because you used 2 different words, and I want to get your sense of how you think those 2 things are different. You talked about audience, and you talked about community. And, podcasters are often building audience. They're building fans, people who consume their content. You've done that, but you've also built community. You talked about building a space where people can come together. Can you elaborate on kind of the difference between the 2?
Yeah, I think part of it is whenever you start to bring that audience, it's about the first time for me, it becomes more expansive, as in the audience can be larger, is sometimes the way that I see it. Audience becomes bigger than yourself. Bigger audience isn't as personal in the sense of you look at somebody and you know who each person is. That to me is more of an audience, where it's like there's people listening to you that you don't know who they are. Whereas for me, with the community aspect of it, was me being able to go to my classes, and then I would see everybody and greet them by their name and go like, "Hey, it's so good to see you here. Hey, John, hey, Marion, how's it going? I'm so glad you're back today. How was the party, that you were going to? How did that work out?" And in that respect, it's the difference is that. And then the other layer to that community is when I would sit back and watch them, and then they would connect with each other and they would start to talk with one another while they were in class, or there were memories, there were co-created memories of events that happened that we collectively would remember all of those things that happened. And sometimes you can build that memory off of an event. And sometimes you can build that memory off of relationship with the media or the content that you are creating. And when I say that, it's like for She Podcast, because that was another community that I built. Jess and I had a podcast called She Podcasts, and we talked about so many different things. We were very transparent about our lives, especially as young moms at that time. We were very irreverent about the way that we talked about all the things, right? Especially within podcasting. And there were many silly moments, many heartfelt moments, many very meaningful, poignant moments that we all had in the show, like Jess and I had in the show. Our audience, when they were listening to us, had experiences with us when we were having these conversations with each other. Then we had She Podcast Live, and we had She Podcast Meetup. So She Podcast Live was a conference just for centering women and non-binary individuals coming together. And then we had a lot of She Podcast meetups within larger conferences. And when that audience got together during these meetups and during this conference, they had lived memories of experiences with Jess and I that were, what is it? What is a parasocial, right? But that connected them. That was the thing that connected them. And then they bonded based off of all of those experiences. So it is very multi-layered as it pertains to what audience is and what community is. But a lot of them have to do with a little deeper thing. It's like it's identifying factor. It's a deeper identity that they have. It's something that they've felt. Sometimes it has to do with an emotional or a feeling thing that brings them to a place where they have pre-chosen that space to be the place that they belong. And once they do that, they open into the community world.
I want to ask about a word that you use there that I think is very interesting, which is co-creation. And when we are content creators, when we are building audience, we're creating it on our own. I mean, obviously, if you've got a co-host, you're creating it with them, but you're not creating it with the audience members. I go and I make my film, or I write my novel, or I write my email newsletter, or film my YouTube video, and then we publish it, and it's released out into the audience's hands, right? And I'm done with it, and I'm on to the next podcast episode, the next email newsletter, right? That's how it works with content. When you are building a community, it really is an act of co-creation. It is something that you are doing not for your members, but with your members, where you're bringing them together, and that space evolves and develops and sometimes goes in directions that you don't know it's going to go in, because it is that feedback. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you've seen that and the various things that you've done?
Yeah, I think I have to say that podcasting is what taught me about that feedback. I didn't know prior to podcasting that you could have a relationship with the content creator, because I come from the sort of legacy media world of the Hollywood type of thing, right? Where you do TV shows or even radio, where yes, there were call-in shows and things like that, but there was always there's the host or there's the actor, and they are doing that thing, and then you are the fan, and you stand back, and once in a while they will you'll win something, or you'll get in on a call, or you'll get a signed autograph or something like that. Whereas with podcasting, every podcaster, at least in the early days when the podcast that I was listening to, all of them had a call to action to get feedback to them, and they all were sharing either a phone number, or an email address. Every single one. And then they would feature voices coming in all the time. And I thought, oh, that's very accessible. Oh my gosh, I want to try that. And the very first time that I sent like an email to one of the podcasters that I was listening to at that time, when he read my email, that was like a life-changing experience for me. I was just blown away by that experience. And just the fact that this person recognized me, named me, and answered my question and took his time to do so immediately created a feeling of loyalty towards that podcaster. It gave me something so enormous, which was it was very to me mutual. It was respectful because he answered my question. And for my end of it, I was like, wow, he saw me, even though it was all audio, obviously. And we became friends. And that is sort of how I experienced that over and over and over again with a lot of different podcasts. And they would all talk to each other, and they would all introduce sort of me to each other. And oh, that's my, that's a listener of my show. She's really great, blah, blah. And they would often talk about the people that were listening to their shows amongst themselves while recording their podcast. So that created sort of a cohesive, recognizable back and forth of information. And so I always thought, this is really interesting. So moving from that beginning stages, I feel it is essential for always to have that open dialogue, which is the feedback that I give to a lot of content creators or a lot of especially podcasters, to have a place where they are actually engaging with their audiences, not for engagement's sake, but for actual dialogue back and forth to get that feedback to them, because it is so valuable when it comes their way. It is so essential, and it allows for the other person to feel that kind of loyalty to somebody who's really truly listening to them. And so that's like step one. Even when I was working over at Libsyn, I remember very specifically, it was in the early Twitter days, and there were, trolls have always been a thing, obviously, in online spaces. People being annoying and people being negative has escalated as of nowadays, because now it's like really out of control. Like it just feels there's a lot of entitlement that comes out of it. Whereas we're at the beginning stages, when we would get sort of like more critical, negative feedback, I would go out of my way to engage with everybody who was having an issue. And I would go into their DMs and I would engage with them that way. And most of the time, that ended up becoming a very respectful acquaintance of their work and my work. And there was a lot more grace between company and between folks that use the product. And that mutual respect was what I found to be the thing that allows for community and good vibes to really grow in spaces like the online world, which we have right now.
Yeah. So you've got to create a safe space. And I think sometimes that phrase gets, looked down upon, but it really is important. And it doesn't just mean, hey, I'm not going to get stabbed if I go here. It's I feel comfortable opening up and connecting with other people here, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. Talk to me a little bit more about She Podcasts and how that evolved from content to a space that you created. What did that look like in the early days? Were there things that you tried and worked and you learned things? Were there things that you tried and they didn't work and so you shifted? And why was that so important? Why was that needed in the early days of podcasting?
Yeah, I think it's still needed. It's just that I don't believe that the ecosystem that we had at that time exists anymore, which is a little bit sad. And I might, talk about that here. But, that space, actually, the idea of that space came from Jessica Kupferman, who is my everything, all the things that we created together within She Podcast. And it really was her sort of drive to create the actual Facebook group. So we were at New Media Expo, and at New Media Expo, it was in Las Vegas. We were sitting around, and we had met a few other women podcasters that we had sort of connected online, and they were there as well. And we had a dinner that was really lovely for all of us to sort of talk shop. And we had never had that experience before. And so that was like a big catalyst. And the other aspect was the fact that we were attending a lot of the sessions, and collectively the feedback that we found is that a lot of the sessions that were being talked about were very male centric, and they were not addressing a lot of the needs that we at that time, especially a lot of us in that table, were moms, young kids. And there was not the space in our lived experience at that moment to be able to execute on the strategies that were being presented. They were all very cookie cutter, very like, do these things and then you'll get whatever, right? And we were like, well, I don't even know if I can record consistently. You know what I mean? Just because our life is chaos. And so the ability for us to just commiserate and talk about the realities of our lives and how to make what we had work was so much more helpful than the actual sessions. That Jess was, you know what, we probably need to have a place where we can talk. And she started just inviting her friends, like just friends that she met there, people that we met at the New Media Expo. This was like a handful, like 10, 20, maybe 30 people that she just wanted to get people together. And then I was in the mix, just like starting to get to know Jess. And I said, well, I know a lot of people. And so I invited a bunch of people to come in there. And in those early days, it just became such a safe space for us to go to ask questions that we needed to ask for ourselves, that we felt weren't being even answered in the other podcasting groups at that time. This was a Facebook experience, by the way. And so that's what started it. It started it that it grew really fast without us doing anything. So that's the hard part about the early days in a lot of things, or when you do that one thing for the first time and it really hits, where you can't say it's because we did these things that's why it worked. I can tell you that the biggest shift happened when we grew way big. And when I say like way big, I would say like at that time, I think once we started to hit over 10,000, 10 to 15,000 people in the group, or, people, because those are, you would hope that there were people, but they were walking the group. It just became a lot more, less curated. We didn't have as much time to help with what was going on in the group. And I was also having another job at that time. And then we were trying other things to sort of monetize. We were never monetizing the group itself. That was like a free experience. And what I started to notice, and I think what really hit like an inflection point right around 2020, because the group continued. That's when like all of a sudden, by the way, all this started in 2014, just to give you context. When that group was established. When we got to and then we had She Podcast Live in 2019, which was, again, a huge thing where people actually bought tickets to go to an event that we put together. And it was the third largest podcasting conference out of the gate in 2019, which is like unheard of. We had, I think, around 700, 800 like people there in that one, like in 2019, which was astounding. So that like took us to a whole other level. And then what ended up happening in 2020 is like, the world sort of exploded in so many different ways. And the capacity to manage online conversations became extraordinarily difficult at that time. And I don't believe we had the infrastructure to address the needs that the community had at that time versus all of the needs of our personal lives going on. And the ability to scale safely became a lot more there's a word for this. It became more of a liability. That's the word.
Yeah.
Because of just, there was just so much. There was so much happening. So that's when it started to become a little less, I don't know what the word is in that, like intimate, I think. Intimate. Everybody knew each other. And there were so many algorithms that switch things, like people didn't know who we were, people didn't know who the rules were. Before, everybody knew who Elsie and Jess was going into that group. I mean, it was our group. It's like people knew us. But then when it started to scale up, there were so many people who did not know who we were. They didn't know what our vibe was. They didn't listen to our podcast. They had no idea what the lore was behind our lives. So everything that I told you before about having those lived experiences, everybody knew each other, that started to sort of erode because we didn't have that much reach. And it was, obviously, I think there was operational. I think that there were a lot of issues around that, but also there's stuff you can't control, especially things like algorithms, where they were no longer pushing like the She Podcast content to our own people. People didn't see our own posts, meaning coming from Jess or coming from me. And the algorithm really, really skewed towards, you have to be on Facebook, you have to have all these friends. And then the more people engage with your content, the more they're going to see the content that you post. But there's people like, sometimes you don't have time to be going in the group all the time in order to get the algorithm to know who you are. You have to do other things, and you just, so that really shifted the vibe inside of She Podcasts at that time.
I think it's such a fascinating case study in what happens when communities grow and get really big and when they move on. And one of the things that starts to happen, and we've seen it in the podcasting space, you and I, that again, in the beginning days, you were just excited when there was somebody who you could be like, oh, you know what a podcast is? What microphone do you use? And then now, as podcasting is so big, it's like email. Everybody's got a podcast. You start to see these smaller groups emerge. Oh, here's the editors hanging out over here, or here's the podcasters of color hanging out over here, or here's the personal finance podcasters hanging out over here, because that's a way to recapture that intimacy when it just gets too big. Let's talk about what you're doing now at Captivate. And I know this is a new role. You're only a couple of months in. Talk to us about what you are doing there. What is your role now at Captivate? And explain what Captivate is.
Yeah. So first of all, Captivate is a podcast hosting and growth platform. So it is, you have your podcast hosted, their media files hosted with Captivate, and then you get an opportunity to go to all the distribution places that we all know and love for in podcasting, Spotify's, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and things like that. It's all like within the Captivate ecosystem and all of those things. And also, what's really lovely about Captivate in the back end is that it is like a marketing suite in the back end. There's a lot of things that I think Mark was very much a visionary as he sort of built Captivate, Mark Asquith, because he saw that content creation isn't necessarily, but back in the day, content, especially for podcasting, you would just do the podcast, and then the marketing that you would do was like, I just released my latest episode, and you would just put it out there, and people would find it. Because it used to be that way, right? People would just find the show and you would build audience basically by doing nothing. And then obviously things started to change. And there was a lot of bigger need from podcasters to do more with their episodes once they published them. Like, they understood the titles and descriptions and like how you promote the show and like all those different things that podcasters also need to learn about in order to get or grow their audiences, or at least be seen by the potential audiences. And Captivate, in terms of their UI and when you go in there, it has like all of these lovely tools for optimizing for SEO and being able to like have these like snippets that are the best thing ever, where you can just update one time, like a call to action that always goes to the bottom of your show notes. And that is dynamically inserted into all of your episodes. So like if you change your number, if you change the call to action, like sign up for my blah blah versus going to the other call to action that you've had before, it like dynamically shifts it all in through your entire like show notes, which is like amazing. Like it's just like little tiny things like that that are really helpful for marketing your podcast and being able to put your stuff out there. Okay, so that is what Captivate is. Now, what I'm doing right now, I'm the creator success and community manager. And my goal there is really just everything that has to do with community, everything that has to do with education, and moving those things together in a way that helps the podcasters keep podcasting, which is something that I've been doing since the inception. And part of this is done through a couple of keystone content plays or keystone strategies that Captivate has. One of them is In and Around Podcasting, which is a podcast about podcasting that I co-host with Rob Walsh. And also we have other voices that are coming into the mix. That's part of what I get a chance to develop, to be able to have more voices inside of that podcast about podcasting. Those are a little bit more industry conversations, a little bit more news, a little bit more nuance, a little more like, you know, sitting around and having a deep convo about podcasting. And then there is the Growth Labs, which is the educational side of it all, where we have extra people come in and teach something very specific, very core-oriented, or have a conversation around a very thoughtfully placed something or other that is necessary for podcasters to know about right now, as well as positioning us as, or like maybe I would do one where I'm talking about community, or maybe something that Danny from our head of support, who is he's just amazing at his job, to be able to come in there and teach something very specific about how to use a tool or how to be able to get the most out of Captivate or something like that, that is very centered on the product itself. That is another aspect of the Growth Labs. And prior to me coming on board, the Growth Labs were part of the sort of back end of Captivate. So if you hosted your show on Captivate, you came into you signed into your account, you went inside the dashboard, and within the back end of Captivate, there was like this whole slew of education that was available to you by the Growth Labs. There's like so many guests that they've had in there, some expert people, some amazingly great content back there, but nobody sees it unless you go in the back end and you see the stuff. So now we're moving sort of a lot of that behind the scenes stuff that we had there only available for Captivate people front facing, so that more people can find it and it's much more visible. So it's not necessarily new. Everything's just becoming more revamped and moving up. So those are some of the core components of what I'm moving forward there. The community aspect is engaging, basically for me, I can't say all podcasters, but I feel like podcasters that are just really curious about making their podcast work and wanting to test things out, and that are willing to have harder conversations around their own visibility. How do they build their audiences? What are the things that they can make them better, where they are choosing to step into a community that's going to be able to help them do that.
So you've talked about some of the content pieces, obviously in and around podcasting, and the Growth Labs, which teaches people how to, do podcasts and make better podcasts. And those are some of the easy pieces that you could do on your own right from the rip, because it isn't necessarily co-creation. And I think in your case, you were inheriting some of those things that already existed and taking them on. Let's talk about that connection piece. Is there a space? I mean, you had mentioned in some of your other communities, there were things like a Facebook group, or there were in-person events. Does that already exist? Is that something that you are looking to build? And do you know what that looks like yet? Are you still in the process of figuring that out? What have you already done? And talk to me a little bit about, that space building where people are actually going to come together and connect. What could that look like?
Yeah, and my right now, one of the key things that I started to sense a couple of years ago is that as it pertains to community building and having that lived experience and that co commingling of things together where we bring people together and we let each other know each other, I feel that it's a lot harder to do that on digital platforms. Before, with the Facebook group, it actually did feel to me every time I went into She Podcast, the OG section of it all, it really did feel like very comfortable, and it was like we were there together. Whereas now, it all feels the same. The UI almost in everything is the same. And I'm, as in, like, from Slack channels to Facebook groups to Discord channels to all of those, or even regular Instagram or regular like Threads or X or wherever it is you're hanging out, LinkedIn. It all has the same UI and the same physical behavior from people. And so it's very hard to say I am in a Slack channel that is my community versus I'm in a Slack channel that's for my job. Like it's the same UI. You can't make the difference, right? So my goal is to be able to start to get folks engaged through the content where I get a chance to start to learn about people, who are the ones that show up, what types of conversations they're having, what are the questions that they're giving me, and then slowly start to see where we can work together to really establish deeper conversations. And I've started through more experiential things. Like I just led a meetup, which it was really a Meet Elsie meetup. And the goal for that meetup was actually twofold. Obviously, it was work related because that's what I'm doing. I am working for a company, and there are things around being able to speak about product and let people know about all the things. And, that's part of the deal inherently. But I also thought, I'm coming in here not knowing who folks like who Captivate users are. These are people that are new to me. I'm probably new to them. And I wanted to get to know them. And I also wanted to see the product through their eyes because I'm also new to Captivate. So I get an opportunity to see things. And I started to know every time I logged in to the platform, I was always going like, you can do what? No way. I was constantly excited. I'm still constantly excited when I go in there and I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. I wanted to talk to other people to see how they were using the platform. I'm sure they know how to use it much better than I do. So the Meet Elsie meetup was about that. It was me asking questions to them about the platform. Like, what are some like key things that they really like? What is their workflow? Like, what's the deal? Tell me all about it, right? And then to be able to go, and I placed it in this way. Like, I guess as a product person, you would say like, what is it? Like, getting critical feedback about product and all that kind of stuff. But the way that I framed it was like, okay, so we've talked about all the good stuff that we've heard from Captivate, which was amazing. Now though, what's that little pebble in your shoe? Like, what's that little thing where you're like, you put in, you're like, oh my God. And you have to take your shoe off and you have to throw the pebble out. Like, what's that for you about the product? And so it was great because if you position it that way, you allow people to go like, yeah, what is that thing that's kind of annoying? And you do it in a way that allows for the respect of everybody there, but also we're collectively working together to make the best experience possible because we all have things to do, right? We all have the goal of this is to create our own communities, our own work putting out there to engage folks. And so it was really lovely to get to know so many folks. And there was so much engagement, and I was able to see, I saw so many other people who were showing up with podcasts I'd never heard of. And I'm always so delighted to talk. I was so high after that meetup that I was just like, I want to have more of those. I want to have more of those. So yeah, that was really amazing.
So I want to highlight two things that I think you said there. Number one, you went in listening. You didn't
Yeah.
go in talking. You know, this wasn't hey, I'm going to give a speech about who Elsie is and what I'm doing here. You really went in asking questions. But the second thing that is really interesting to me is that you did this through events, and this was an online meetup.
Yeah.
But you didn't go in and immediately set down permanent structures. Here's the group. We're going to build it on Discord or Facebook groups or Mighty Networks or Circle or whatever. You said, let's just do an event and talk to people. And I assume part of that is because the event ends. And so it allows you to get that feedback and figure out what the next step is. Even if you don't know it, that it really is about information gathering for you, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think part of it too is that you always have to think, as somebody who's building things, you have to understand the capacity, not only your capacity as sort of like a community leader, right, as the manager of the community, but also to understand the capacity of the team itself. Like, everybody has a job and they have things that they're doing to get the work done. And in order to build community, you have to understand how much time things actually take to build, how much time it actually takes to have because communities have content. It's not just about, showing up. Sometimes it is. But even then, let's say I'm doing a community let's say my community is a weekly meetup that we have open for podcasters to show up. Okay. Seems simple, like you're showing up, but actually it's not as simple as that. There has to be a plan every single time you're showing up. How are you going to get people engaged? How are you going to get people to do the thing that you're supposed to be doing here? Like, what's the goal of when we get together? There has to be a level of guidance in there, because you're setting up an experience. And I think that folks think like that experience is easy to do. It is not. It's an energetic shift. You have to be ready for people to be there. And you also have to be very sort of future seeing. What are things that could come up that could derail this? Like, because I've had them all happen. Sometimes people take the mic forever, and it's like, when are you going to be quiet, person? It's time for you to get off the stop talking. There's times when it's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes there's like all kinds of weird sounds going on, where like somebody doesn't have their like thing muted and it's disruptive to everybody, and you have to be able to mute everybody. Like, you have to know the tools that you have available to there. There's people in there sometimes that are like having stuff happening in the chat that's derailing what you're trying to have a conversation with in real life. So there's so many different boundaries that you have to set from the beginning, so people can actually engage and feel like, I know where I am. And then you also have personalities that tend to take things over. So you have to understand the chemistry of the people in the room. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. I remember very specifically, going back to my yoga days, when I was doing sort of like live teaching, right? And there were times when I would plan my class. We were going to be working on, let's say I'm going to be doing handstands today. We're going to work on getting people to do handstands, and I'm going to walk them through the whole thing. And I had a plan, and I was like, this is what we're going to do. And then that day somebody comes in and I always go like, does anybody have I would go one-on-one to new people. Do you have anything going on in your body that I need to know about? And sure thing, most of the time that person would go like, oh yeah, I just had shoulder surgery and I'm recovering. I'm like, oh, great. I can't. Oh my God, how am I going to teach this class now with this person with shoulder surgery here? So I had to be able to, you have to be able to adjust and be able to know what you need to do when you have things like that happen. When things are derailed, like, how do you bring people back together? Anyway, that's just one experience for that. So meaning somebody has to do that job, and there's all of these other things to do. How are you going to promote the event? Who's going to be doing the graphics for it? How are you going to put the description out? Who's going to be, scheduling the reminders out? What platform are you going to be using to remind people to show up? How much social are you going to be doing? Are you going to be investing any kind of paid marketing to be able to get these events out? Are you going to, there's like all of this other operational stuff that goes along with it. It's not just like, let's do it. So for me, looking at the capacity and starting to learn what my capacity in my job is, doing all of these things and adding a layer of a community, whatever that might be, what does that look like? What does it look like for year 1, for year 2, for year 3? And being able to slowly build that out versus let's just open up a Discord channel. Let's just have, weekly meetups. Let's just be, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
You are also in a unique position where, I think a lot of organizations, the way this happens is they buy into the concept of community and then they go, okay, we need to hire somebody to run the community. Let's go find a community manager or whatever. In your case, it was you found yourself on the market and they went, oh, Elsie's available. We got to get Elsie over here because, you're very highly thought of in the podcasting space. And they came to you and said, what do you want to do? And you kind of said, well, I've been doing community. But that in some ways puts you in a different position because you are doing community in an organization that is really about audience building. How do you get buy-in on the concept of community? How do you get people on board and understanding what you're doing, but also recognizing that it is a bit of a different mindset from audience building? And so how do you interact with that as you're dealing with other people in the organization?
Yeah, it actually was, I think it wasn't necessarily that yes, I was available. But I think I was available for the job that they had in mind already. So it wasn't like all of a sudden I was like, this is what I want to do. It's like, it was sort of like synergy, right? But in terms of what the community aspect of it, I think that's a very, very important question to ask, because when leadership isn't sold on what community is, it's very hard to sell that. And once they buy in, it's very challenging to find metrics to measure the impact of a community, because there's a lot of nebulous metrics as it pertains to, is this working or not? Based on, the way that we measure click-through rates on newsletters, right? You can very easily see when people are opening the newsletter or what's working, adjusting all kinds of stuff. Like when people are clicking through stuff, you could see the data right in front. Whereas being able to capture the impact of community on a product is a little bit harder to do, and you have to set a lot of tools to be able to do that. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm really thinking through as I set this up, because what I'm visioning is the community itself is not a place. Like, I'm not wanting the community to be like a Discord channel. Like, that's not what it is. To me, I want a general vibe of the Captivate podcaster, somebody who really vibes with the brand, to know, oh my God, I belong here. I love this work. I love showing up for the meetups. I love the growth labs. I really listen to In and Around Podcasting. I consume the newsletter, or even just taking a little snippet of all of those things and knowing the minute you touch anything that we put out to go like, oh, this is great. And so we gather. It's kind of like, I just imagine it like, when you're fishing and you have those big nets, whatever
Yes.
nets on the ground, and you just go like this, and you're like, oh my God, I caught all the right? You caught all the fish that you needed to do it, but you're putting a really long, wide net into it, and they slowly keep on coming and coming and coming because of the the ecosystem of work that we're putting out there, because the overall vision is centering community. And I think that that's what I have the most, is to know that regardless of where, that's why I set up like one email. That was like one of the key things I really asked from the beginning. We have Captivate, we have community@captivate.fm. That is the email address for all of the things we're doing. So for in and around podcasting, that's the email feedback for the show. If you want us to answer or any questions or cover any news or whatever, email community@captivate.fm. If you are watching our expert sessions on YouTube when we're streaming and there's something that you really want to get to us, or you really want to suggest something, or whatever, if it's just saying like that was amazing and you missed it or whatever, you email community@captivate.fm. If you have, if we're doing anything that in the meetup, that's what I asked for. Like afterwards, I go like, hey guys, if you really enjoyed this, I'd really really would love any more feedback about any of this stuff, especially how this went and whatnot. Email community@captivate.com. Because that way I can see that conversation coming in, and I'm able to then have like a collective view as to what people are looking for. Because some people may not show up. I'm not a shower up to community spaces. I just am not that. But I'm a very big community person, and I vibe with the people that I love. And so I want to be able, and I know that there's more people like me, and I know there's other people who really do want like a physical place. I want to be able to provide a little bit of that in all the different places, but it's about how you build with community centered first, and the content comes to support that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And that's how I move into it, because then we're just going to get stuck on where do we put it? Are we going to use a Facebook group? Is it going to be Discord? Is it going to be school? I don't know. How are we, I just don't want to spend time doing that. I want to spend time building it. And then I've seen that sometimes when you begin the process of getting that initial momentum, they will start to slowly show you where they move. And then you're able to go, oh, I get it. When I come fishing, I got to go on this part.
I love that analogy. That's such a great analogy. I could talk to you about this forever, but I'll ask you one last question. For somebody who finds themselves in a situation similar to yours, where they are tasked with going into an organization that exists, and now they want to build community, what advice would you give them about what to do first? Like, where would you start?
I actually have I had this huge mind map where I started to do an audit of all of the existing things, right, that I had going on in there. And for me, it was really like, what I have as a big overarching question for myself when I started to get this together is the community primarily for customer acquisition or retention? And yeah, this is obviously for a SaaS company. So you have to think about that too. Where are you building community? And this is a SaaS company. This is a product online company. We're trying to, acquire people to buy the product. That might be like for a podcast, for what else has community sort of situations, like things like the library. That's like some of my libraries to me, like public libraries are amazing. They build a lot of community through events where they have a lot of people that show up right there. And so what I would ask the library then is like, what is the goal of this community? Is it for people to get a new library card? Is it for people to use the space? Is it for, building the actual content inside the library? Maybe you want to build people to come to the children's section and really engage with the toddler, like story times. Maybe that's something that they're really looking to do. So you have to get very specific as to why this community is building and why. Right? And how to get those people in the door. So that's the first thing. So no, regardless though, is it acquisition? Is it that you want more people to come in, or do you want to keep the people there? And you have to figure out, I know most of us want both, and I get that, but I want you to be really honest. That's what I would say to people. Which one out of those two is the one that's really important right now? for you, because that's going to guide how you build everything else, outlining everything out. And that gives you an idea of, especially at the beginning, of how to get that retention moving, meaning in the sense of like, how do we address the pain points from the people who have been here forever that already have the loyalty? And also, what are things that are missing from people who could possibly come to, visit the library, but don't know enough. So you can start to see like, what are the different places we can actually create the content or create the discovery engine, I guess, for having people step into the type of community that you want. That's like one of the key things, I think, overall, when you're tasked to do that, to ask whoever your higher up is, if it's, do you want acquisition or do you want retention? And if they say both, ask, which, if you were to only choose one, though, give me one that is more. Even if you give me like 70% acquisition, 30% retention, or 50-50, you have to start to think like, okay, if it really is 50-50, then we have to really outline the measurement of how we know. And the other thing I'm going to say before we move forward is, before you start to build anything, you have to know what your baseline is. Because oh my God, I cannot even tell you how hard it's been to like build things and not have that data, because you don't have any receipts. And what do I mean by that? I guess I'm going to get a little like randomly personal here, but let's talk about hormones.
Let's.
And so let's talk about hormones. So here's the thing. Like, in order to know what kind of like HRT, if people know, like, especially for women of a certain age, there's been a lot of talk about hormones, about like, taking estrogen and, progesterone, testosterone, like all of these things in order for your body to, work optimally, whatever. But you don't know how much you need to take if you don't know what your baseline is. Like, you have to know at least where you're starting from to see what that number is, so that you know where you gotta go. And you can't just start taking something, even with like iron levels, or even if it's like, whatever, insulin levels. You gotta know where your baseline is before you know where you gotta go, or if things are working. If you just start taking things and you're like, okay, I think it's all working, we don't have enough information here to understand. Data is important. So the first thing is, we have to set a baseline. There are X amount of people signed up for the newsletters. If there's like, at least let's look at the average response to any time that we post anything on the public Facebook page. Like, even if you have no community, like what's going on the Facebook, on the social channels. That to me is also community. Let's start with, okay, X amount of engagement here. Okay, this is how many people are opening up the newsletters. Okay, that's great. This is how many comments we're getting on blogs or whatever. This is how much response we're getting whenever we send out an email from the support channel. All of those things. Talk to the support teams. Talk to people dealing with people in the library. How many times do people open up library cards? Where are we start? What's the bottom part of that? How many people lose their library cards? How many people don't know, are going to that page, like how to get a library card? How many phone calls you have? Like, you have to have something to measure and see that before you start to see what you want to build.
So if I'm hearing you right, it's know where you want to go and know where you are.
Yes.
Before you can start figuring out how you get from point A to point B.
Correct. Oh my gosh, look, I talked for like 20 minutes on that, and you're like, just know here and do this. Like, you gotta know these things.
I'm a summarizer.
Yes,
I before I was a podcaster, I was a radio guy, and we have 15 seconds to say things, and then we gotta, it's called hitting the post, when you talk right up to where the lyrics kick in, and then you stop talking right at that moment. So.
I need to know that. I want to know that.
Unless you get a Cure song. If you get a Cure song, then you've got like a minute and a half to talk at the beginning.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Elsie Escobar, thank you so much. This has been, I loved hearing about all this. This has been fascinating. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing all of your insights with you. And congratulations on the new job at Captivate.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited. So, join the community, hang out, follow us on social. Check us out on YouTube. We'll be doing things. Like, you don't even have to join, as in, like, go to a different place. Just see what we're doing.
Cool.
And
Well, we'll be watching.
Participate. And hey, if you have any questions or anything related to Captivate, email community@captivate.fm.
All right. Thanks, Elsie.
You bet.